Yeah, the 111 First project really came in response to the winter pressures that are always there on urgent care services, but also in the context of COVID-19 and reduced capacity in EDs, that we would need to look at directing individuals to 111 First services to really divert them from attending an urgent care services as a first port of call and reduce some of the pressure that would be happening in those spaces, whilst also ensuring that people who really needed access to those services were not dissuaded from doing so when they needed it. So it's important that people knew that the NHS was still there for them in critical moments, but how they use the right service at the right time. So we had really, when we started off in the project, we had two choices. We could have designed it from an operational perspective in terms of what we knew we wanted to implement, or we could really start with a user-centered approach and say, actually, what does it feel like for an individual who's going through those experiences? And what would the stages of the process look and feel like for them, so that we could really sort of follow that journey and really shape the design of the work that we do both now and on an ongoing basis with a real understanding of what it feels like. Well, I think in the past, how we would have done a project of this kind is really to have taken some of the understanding of where people are using it today and then designed a solution in isolation from users. At best, we may have then spent some time afterwards understanding what the experience looked like and evaluating that, but we wouldn't really have known in detail what was driving points of satisfaction or dissatisfaction through any kind of redesign process. So what was really different for us was actually involving people in that design process. So, these things are still ongoing, and not many of the changes have not been implemented yet. But when they are, we will be able to go back to the feedback we receive from people at the design phase and really start to have a bit more understanding about why patient flows will respond in one way or another, because we've kind of gone through and built it up in partnership with people at the very start. So in terms of the project, we were involving both clinical staff and program management staff, but also it's really important for us that again, this mindset of the answer comes from those who are closest to the situation, that actually involving right down to kind of reception staff in the process, so that we could really have those individuals who knew what it felt like on a daily basis and what those interactions would look like. So they could also hear directly from patients going through the process of what it felt like to them. So there could be that good exchange of information on both sides. Well, I think the really important thing about all working together through this was that everyone had the same understanding and everyone had the same set of information to work from. So it actually gave everyone the same grounding in terms of experiences of patients. And it's worth remembering that whilst clinical staff will have contact with individuals on a daily basis, they won't always hear all of the conversation. So they won't always hear what the patient says afterwards, after they've left the room. They'll only see and hear what that patient shows them at the time. And so it's really important for them to understand what an individual might say, maybe, or the way in which they behave will be guided by how they're feeling at that moment in time. And that was one of the really critical things that came out from the Mace Menter approach, was the use of emoticons during the engagement with individuals to really sort of gauge what the emotion felt like, because that ended up being a really important insight from this. It's as important what people, as important as what people do and say is how they're feeling at that moment in time, because that really underpins everything. So that was one of the key things that came through from that. Well, I think it was really important to involve Mace Menter in the project because of their ability to really step back from the operational detail and to to help us work through not just how do we make sure we design a process where we can work through the design with individual members of the public in a way that will kind of elicit the right response from them, both kind of the rational and emotional responses that we would get from people through the design and understand those and interpret those, but also their expertise in terms of working through the outputs of that engagement work and translating that into, the so what's, which in this case we used a kind of almost a how might we exercise. So how might we design services to improve the experience? And so we went through a series of how might we questions with the clinical team, the program team, and also all of the key staff members, so that they helped us to work through that as a group, and helped us to capture feedback and ideas from that the kind of the key stakeholder group as we went through, so that we were able to translate what we'd learned from our engagement work into a set of clear recommendations that could be implemented. So I think one of the critical outputs from this piece of work was that it actually played a role of being a pilot for a way of, bringing this people-centered design approach to a much more wider and more commonplace approach across the whole of the system, and that helped us to become one of the key case studies for establishing a user experience lab within the Southwest, where we can really formalise our approach to doing this work on an ongoing basis, share learnings that have come out from projects, and also work in partnership with colleagues in systems across the region. For me, it was this was a really incredibly successful project in terms of allowing us to shape what's possible and to open people's eyes to a different way of working, and really demonstrate what's possible when we take a different approach, and when we start by thinking, what would happen? How do we do this differently if we put the user at the heart of it? And actually, it then gives us the confidence that actually, if we can have a conversation starting in that way across the system, and if everyone was to start any kind of change or quality improvement process with that same question of how would this be different if we put people at the heart of it, it would make a transformational approach for our system as a whole. So it really gives us that inspiration of what can be possible by working in a different way.